What's up, Green Bay Packers fans? Welcome back. As always, thank you for joining me. My name's Paul Brettel. Brian Gutekunst spoke to us on Thursday. So today we're going to be diving into a potential approach, potential outlook on free agency for the Green Bay Packers, how they might go about things this offseason. But first, before we do all that, you know what to do. Hit like on the video, hit subscribe on the YouTube channel. I greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work, including the article version of what we're discussing here today, over at ESPNLacrosse.com. And my Wisconsin sports fans, Packers, Brewers, Bucks, Badgers, download the 105.5 ESPN Lacrosse app. Everything you need right there. So, like I said, Brian Gutekunst spoke on Thursday. Number of takeaways from it. Our focus is going to be on, of course, we're in the offseason, looking ahead, free agency, and what I think, generally speaking, and again, each offseason is going to be different. How the Packers go about it's going to be different, right? They're not all going to look the same depending on cap situation, positions of need, who's available in free agency, so many factors. But I thought there were some good insights into generally how the Packers go about the offseason, their thought process behind it. So I want to dive into that aspect of it today. So towards the end, Brian Gutekunst said, it's time we started competing for championships. And at the end of our conversation here today, I'm going to circle back to that. But that's obviously the mindset. That's the feeling within the organization, right? We're past the point of, all right, we're growing, right? We need to be there now. That's the feeling that seems to be within the organization. I know, obviously, the fan base, many at least, feel that as well, right? Even this past season very much had a feel of needs to show that they can be a Super Bowl contender. Now, just because there is that feeling internally, right? It's time to start competing for championships. That doesn't mean that is going to dictate aggressively how Brian Gutekunst, the Packers, go about navigating the offseason. Gutekunst was asked specifically, do you believe in windows, right? Referring to championship windows, right? You have this year or two where the contracts align, you have the right players. We got to go for it. We got to go all in. We got to do everything we can to maximize this opportunity. He said no. He's not a big believer in that. The Packers, as I think we know, and this goes beyond just Brian Gutekunst's tenure as the general manager, they're process driven. They're not going to let the, again, quote unquote championship window that they may be in right now. They're not going to let that dictate how they go about navigating the offseason. They have their processes in place. There's the outputs for those processes that are going to impact what they do in free agency, how they approach the draft, any sort of salary cap maneuvers that they might make. That's going to dictate, again, all those different factors. And what I just described is obviously very, very high level compared to all the nuance that goes into it. And again, we don't even know a percentage of everything that goes into that decision making. But the output from these established processes that they have is, again, going to dictate what they do in free agency, what they do in the draft, how they navigate their salary cap situation, rather than gut feelings, rather than an emotional response to, we're in a window, we got to maximize it, let's go out and do X, Y, Z, right? It's process. This is a process-driven organization, and that's what largely navigates their decisions. Now, I'm going to guess that approach probably doesn't sound very aggressive, but Brian Gutekunst did say he believes that they operate aggressively every single year. And I think a good example of that, obviously, is this past offseason, 2024, going out and signing Xavier McKinney, going and signing Josh Jacobs to high-end deals at their respective positions. If the right player is there, the Packers will go out and, as we saw last offseason, they're willing to make those additions, right? That, in a sense, is operating aggressively. Now, I think the big difference between how the Packers may view operating aggressively, because I'm going to imagine that there are some of you out there when I said, Gutekunst said that they go into every offseason wanting to attack it aggressively, that there is some head nodding, right? Some head shaking, right? That belief might not be there outside of the organization. But I think the big difference between that is again, the Packers let the processes that they have, the age of the player, the production of the player, their locker room fit, the salary cap impact, not only this season, but down the road. How does that going to impact the salary cap in future years? All of those factors, along with, again, very high level. I know I'm missing things that are out there, but All of those factors have to align and make sense. And then if they do, the Packers will, again, make that attempt to bring in that high-profile free agent addition, again, as they did last year. But I think something else that we've also learned over the years is that they also have their line in the sand, right? They might know, like, okay, this player is someone that we want to pursue. Here's the contract that we're willing to offer. And the Packers, for better or worse, that line in the sand, they stick with that. In some instances, like last year, again, you get Josh Jacobs, you get Xavier McKinney, you're able to bring those players in. But you might, because, again, you stick to that line in the sand, that contract number, which, again, results from the processes that you've established, that you believe in, that you stick to, you might lose some players in that regard as well. So from that perspective, I think that's where the Packers are coming from. Gutekunst's coming from when he says, yeah, we do operate aggressively. Again, if the processes tell us, if those various boxes are checked, we will go and pursue those type of high-end players. Now, again, I think the discrepancy is when you talk to the fan base and you say, what's an aggressive offseason? It's saying wide receivers in need. That player's the best wide receiver available. Go and get them, right? That's, I think, to many what operating aggressively is. Attacking a need with the best player that's out there, really regardless of what those other factors are. Again, age, where are they at in their career, locker room fit, contract costs, not just this year, but down the road. What's the trickle-down effect of having that contract on the books when you have other rookies coming up who are going to need to get paid as well? Those are all other factors that come into these decisions. So I think that's my opinion, but I think that's the difference in perspective in terms of operating aggressively, which, again, Gutekunst said they think that they want to, or they know that they want to attack each offseason aggressively. That just isn't always going to turn into getting in a Xavier McKinney, getting a Josh Jacobs every offseason, because as Gutekunst even said, those type of players just are not available very often. But when they are, again, if the other elements align and are in play, Packers have shown that they will take those swings for the fences. And again, whether or not it works out, that's a different conversation. But I think that helps provide a little bit of perspective into what the approach is and how they might go about working through who they're going to potentially look to bring in this offseason. Now, on paper, salary cap wise, Packers are in the best position that they've been in several years. Helping them is that they have a number of key contributors playing on rookie contracts, right? Relatively inexpensive deals. So according to Over the Cap, Packers currently have around $50 million in available cap space for this offseason, which is the 10th most in football. And of course, there's going to be, there's discussions that they'll have to make around outside additions, right? Are they going to attack some of those positions in need, right? Defensive end, bolstering the pass rush, the wide receiver position, cornerback room. Again, those are some of the conversations they'll have to have around how to allocate the cap space that they have. They'll have to have conversations about their own free agents, right? A few notable names are Josh Myers, Eric Stokes, Brandon McManus, TJ Slayton. Again, those are other conversations that are going to be a part of this equation when how it comes out to allocating those salary cap dollars. But Brian Gutekunst feels good about where the Packers are right now cap-wise. They have flexibility. And in recent years, 2021 to, and even somewhat last year, the Packers didn't necessarily have that in their favor. At the end of the Aaron Rodgers era, in an effort to, because they had a number of veterans, they had a number of high-priced contracts on that team, in an effort to keep that group together during that stretch from 2020, 2021, 2022, the Packers did a lot of restructuring of contracts. They did a lot of kicking the salary cap can down the road, taking cap charges from the current year, restructuring the contract to push them into future years. Now, the benefit of that, right, is in the moment, in the current year, you lower a player's cap hit, gives you more flexibility in the moment. But those cap charges have to hit at some point, and they hit in the future. They hit in those years down the road, so a player's cap hit at that time becomes larger. It's like using a credit card to a degree, right? It gives you the money you need in the moment, but you got to pay it back at some point. You have to recognize it has to hit the books at some point. And because of those previous years' maneuvers, again, which they needed to do at that time, in following years, again, their salary cap situation has suffered because of it. And then of course you get into the Aaron Rodgers trade, left behind him, I think around $40 million in dead cap during the 2023 season. But for the most part now, they've gotten beyond that time frame where they had to recognize all of those salary cap charges that were pushed from past years to future years. And right now we're seeing the benefit of that for this team again. And you couple that, getting that off the books with having so many rookie contracts on the books, especially key contributors. And again, you're in a good cap situation. Like I said, Brian Gutekunst feels that they're in a good spot. $50 million in cap space according to Over the Cap, 10th most in football. And going back to that aggressive conversation that we were having earlier, the way the Packers operated and maneuvered the salary cap in 2021, 2022, again, to try to retain their core, to keep the key pieces in place, to still add new players contracts where they needed to, and push those cap charges down the road, that is operating aggressively, right? It's not in the conventional sense of going out there and, signing every high-priced free agent that you can, but that is one way to operate aggressively from a salary cap perspective in order to keep your group, who you believe at that time was talented enough to go out and be a contender to compete for a Super Bowl. So that is one of those, again, that is an aggressive way to operate, and it very much went against the grain for what the Packers have done organizationally, again, going beyond Brian Gutekunst's tenure. That was very, very different. Those were outlier years in terms of how the Green Bay Packers operated. Now, where they are now is much more conventional for them in terms of their cap situation. They don't have a ton of additional cap dollars pushed to 2026, 2027. And ideally, as Brian Gutekunst said, where they're currently at is where he wants to live, where he wants to be able to operate from. But again, if the right player or players were available and it forced the Packers to have to, again, move dollars to the future, move salary cap dollars to future years in order to make an acquisition now, Gutekunst said that they would do that, right? It all comes back to the right player. And what leads the Packers to the right player are those processes, right? Are all those different elements, factors, however they go about their decision making, and doing the same process over and over and repeating it. So again, there isn't any emotion, there isn't any feeling. The process, the numbers, the calculations, whatever it might be, that's telling you how to operate, because in the long run, that should give you the most structure, the most stability, the most opportunity to hit on those opportunities when you do take those swings. So it all works together in that regard. And when you can't ever build out your roster through free agency. Free agency is meant to supplement. If you miss on a position in the draft a few years ago and you need to bring in that player, it's kind of like the safety position this last year, right? Packers drafted Darnell Savage, and I think it was 2021, 2020, or maybe 2019 in that time frame, but they didn't really add to it during those coming years, right? They made some low profile free agent additions, 1-year deals, right? A Jonathan Owens, a Rudy Ford, to bolster the depth, but that was a position group they didn't address a lot. So then when Darnell Savage leaves in free agency, you got to go all out on that group, right? You spend multiple draft picks, you go out and you get a Xavier McKinney. Like, that's what free agency is for. It's meant to supplement a position group that, for whatever reason, just is lacking, right? Didn't turn out how you had hoped it would, whether it be through missed picks, whether it be through just not investing the necessary draft or free agency capital beforehand. That's what free agency is for. When it comes to building out a strong roster, you have to do that through the draft. In the salary cap world that we live in, that the NFL lives in, you can't build out a strong, deep roster through free agency. There's just not enough, with the way contracts are increasing, there's just not enough salary cap space to be able to do that. So the Packers their top talent is still always going to come through that draft process. That's where they're still going to live. That's where they're going to want to operate from. And free agency, again, is just a supplement to that when needed, if the processes that the Packers have in place dictate that that's what they should do. So are the Packers going to go out and sign T. Higgins this offseason? We'll see. But what's going to determine that factor isn't only we need a receiver. He's the best receiver out there. Let's go get him. There's so many other things in play. Last thing I'll say about this. I know that approach isn't exciting, right? It's not, hey, we got $50 million in cap space. We feel we're on the cusp of a Super Bowl. We're going to go and use every penny to bring in every single high-profile player that we can. I get it. That's exciting. What I just described and went through, that's not exciting. But that's the Packers process, right? And what I was trying to do here is just give you insights into how they operate, how they maneuver. Again, regardless of right, wrong, or indifferent, whether it works out, whether it fails, whether it's in the middle. But that's the thought process behind how they navigate these free agency periods, the salary cap, and all of those different aspects. Last thing before we get out of here, I'm going to circle back to Gutekunst's comment. It's time we started competing for championships. That line came up in a question that was asked. Again, you didn't win the Super Bowl this year. You were one and done in the playoffs. What was disappointing about 2024? What do you want to see moving forward? And again, it's time we start competing for championships. But what Brian Gutekunst mentioned in particular is going to be a key element to that is urgency. He wants to see the urgency from this team, from this roster, because these moments, getting to the playoffs, again, it's obviously become customary for the Green Bay Packers for 30 plus years now, but it's not a given. And so he wants more urgency that when these opportunities arrive, when you get to 11 wins, when you're in the playoffs and you have an opportunity to get hot and make a run, that you do everything you can to capitalize on it. And now this next part, this is just going to be my opinion on it. The Packers have, second year in a row, the youngest roster in the NFL. And there's tons of benefit to that. The inexpensive rookie contracts that we've mentioned, speed, athleticism, hungry young players. But there's a learning curve that comes with that aspect as well. And while at the end of the day, the youth is not an excuse, and the Packers are the first ones to dismiss any of that conversation, we also can't pretend that it's not their reality either. And there's a difference in being young in age and being young in experience. As we look ahead to 2025, the Packers, they're still going to be young in age collectively as a roster, but they're past the point of being young in experience. A lot of these players have 2+ years of playing time under their belt. They've played in pivotal games that they have to win in the regular season to get to the playoffs. They've played in postseason games now. It's time for that next step to take place. And as Gutekunst said, it's the urgency, right? It's the urgency component of it. And I do think that with a young roster, that could be something that there's a learning aspect that you have to go through to realize that urgency component is important, right? If it's your first year in the NFL, you go out and make the playoffs, you go on a run, your second year in the playoffs, you get to 11 wins, you have another playoff game, right? Like that's your normal. That's all you know. But that's not a given. Like I said at the start of all this, it's not a given and it can't be treated that way. So there needs to be that added intensity, that added, urgency to take advantage of these opportunities when they come. And so again, this is just my pure opinion on the matter. But when I hear there needs to be more urgency and we look at the youth that's throughout this roster, again, that could be one of the, I'm not going to say downsides, but one of the learning aspects for such a young team is how to make sure that they're maximizing those moments, capitalizing on those opportunities that are in front of them. So I appreciate you guys tuning in. If you've come this far, if you made it this far in the video, you might as well hit like, you might as well hit subscribe on the channel. I greatly appreciate it. Follow me on Twitter at Paul_Brettel. Find all my work over at ESPNlacrosse.com and download the 1055 ESPN Lacrosse app. So until next time, friends, take care.